national income, what are the key terms? And the key terms are number one, revenue deficit, number two, fiscal deficit, and number three, primary deficit. I have seen in the exam, as I had to appear three times to pass this exam, because first time when I appeared without any preparation, and second time when I appeared with some preparation, but then could not make a second time also. And when I appeared for the third time, of course appeared third time with full preparation, and with God's grace I could pass it also. एंड आई स्टिल रिमेंबर, सिंस मैंने ये एग्ज़ाम 3 बार दिया हुआ है, तो मुझे बहुत सारे क्वेश्चन अभी भी मेरे दिमाग में हैं जो मैंने वहाँ पर देखे थे. जैसे मैं आपको पोरी का बताया, पोर्ट का बताया, डी लोम का बताया, डी लॉक का बताया, है ना, फ्री फ्रॉम रॉयल्टी का बताया, विद और विदाउट बताया. तो ये सारे क्वेश्चंस वहाँ पर उसमें आते हैं. उसी तरह से देयर कैन बी अ क्वेश्चन ऑन एज टू व्हाट इज़ रेवेन्यू डेफिसिट. And what is revenue deficit? Revenue deficit is revenue receipts minus revenue expenditure, and that is your revenue receipt. Revenue receipt minus revenue expenditure, and that is your revenue deficit. So and it is revenue deficit because we are talking in the context of our budget, and we know that our budget always has revenue deficit. We still have to reach to a point where we have revenue surplus. Since we do not have revenue surplus, we do not talk about the revenue surplus. We only talk about revenue deficit. And how do we get the figure of revenue deficit? As I said earlier, revenue receipts minus revenue expenditure. So the question can be, which of the following will give you revenue deficit? And this is one answer they will give, that is revenue receipts minus revenue expenditure. They will give you three more options, which are going to be the wrong options. So if you understood the concept, and you understand the concept in any case, I know, but you have to be crystally clear about the concept, because वहाँ पर आपको चांस लेना नहीं है, वहाँ पर आपको सटीक आंसर देना है. तो once you understand revenue deficit is revenue receipts minus revenue expenditure, so that is your revenue deficit, and you will very easily tick mark this answer. What is fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is total receipts minus total expenditure. That is your fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit is the overall deficit in the budget. Overall deficit in the budget. And that is why I'm sure all of you would have noticed. And see, there is always a focus on controlling the fiscal deficit. On controlling the fiscal deficit. And that is why you also have a law, and that is on Fiscal Management Act, and that prescribes for the country as to how India has to bring down its fiscal deficit over the years. And that is because fiscal deficit is your overall gap in your receipts and in your payments. So which means total receipts, capital receipts as well as revenue receipts on one hand, capital expenditure as well as the revenue expenditure on the other hand, where the difference between them is revenue fiscal deficit. What is primary deficit? Now this is again something very interesting that we must understand. So what is primary deficit? And please remember, this is one number which is really very crucial for the economic administration of any economy. So what is primary deficit? Primary deficit, fiscal deficit minus interest payment the government makes on the earlier borrowings, and that is your प्राइमरी डेफिसिट. प्राइमरी डेफिसिट का मतलब क्या है कि मेन डेफिसिट कौन सी है. मेन डेफिसिट कौन सी है का क्या मतलब है कि वो डेफिसिट विच इज अराइजिंग ऑन अकाउंट ऑफ incurring of the expenditure, which is that deficit is known as primary deficit. प्राइमरी डेफिसिट को आप कैसे फाइंड आउट करते हो? प्राइमरी डेफिसिट को आप फाइंड आउट करते हो बाय डिडक्टिंग द इंटरेस्ट that the government will be paying on the earlier borrowings from the figure of fiscal deficit, and that is your primary deficit. So again there can be a question, which of the following will give you primary deficit, and then they will give you four options. One of the option is going to be fiscal deficit minus interest on earlier borrowings. So once you understand the concept, then you would be very easily able to answer as to what is primary deficit It is nothing but fiscal deficit minus interest payments on the earlier borrowings by the government.